The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty street of Maple Creek, Colorado, as Belinda Laine watched through the grimy saloon window, wondering if this would be the day she finally escaped. The year was 1876, and for the 5 women who worked at the Snake Eye Saloon, freedom seemed as distant as the stars that would soon appear in the night sky. Owned by the ruthless Franklin Dobbs, the women were little more than property, bought and sold with the establishment, their debts manipulated to ensure they could never leave. Belinda tugged nervously at the frayed lace on her dress, a once fine garment now worn thin from years of use. At 23, she'd spent nearly 5 years trapped in this gilded cage, serving drinks and entertaining the rough men who passed through, all while enduring Dobbs' cruel treatment. Her emerald eyes, once bright with hope, had dimmed with each passing season. "You're up in 5 minutes, Belinda," called Mabel, the oldest of the saloon girls at 32. Her face, though still beautiful, carried the lines of a hard life. "Dobbs wants you to sing tonight," Belinda nodded, smoothing her auburn hair. She'd once dreamed of being a real singer, not just entertainment for drunken cowboys and miners. "Did you see the new arrival?" she whispered, keeping her voice low to avoid Dobbs' attention. "The tall fellow with the silver spurs, hard to miss him," Mabel replied, adjusting a hairpin. "Keeps to himself, though, just drinking and watching." The man had caught Belinda's attention the moment he walked through the swinging doors. Unlike the boisterous patrons who typically frequented the Snake Eye, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His worn duster and weathered hat spoke of long days on the trail, but there was something in his storm-gray eyes that hinted at intelligence and purpose. "Ladies," Dobbs' harsh voice cut through their conversation, "I ain't paying you to gossip. Get out there and make these men spend their money." At 50, Franklin Dobbs was a bloated testament to excess, with a handlebar mustache perpetually stained with tobacco and a temper that flared at the slightest provocation. He ruled the saloon with an iron fist and a leather strap, treating the women as investments rather than human beings. Belinda took a deep breath, plastered on her practiced smile, and stepped out onto the small stage. The piano player, Old Pete, began a familiar tune, and she launched into Beautiful Dreamer, her clear soprano rising above the din of clinking glasses and coarse laughter. As she sang, her gaze drifted to the mysterious stranger sitting in the corner. For a moment, their eyes met, and Belinda felt something stir within her, a long, dormant ember of hope. Then Dobbs' glare from behind the bar reminded her of her place, and she quickly looked away. The stranger, however, continued to watch. His name was Wyatt Vallens, and he'd come to Maple Creek with a purpose. At 31, he'd spent years riding the range, first as a cowhand, then as a trail boss, saving every penny he earned. The Civil War had taken his youth, the cattle drives his middle years, but now he was ready for something different. Wyatt nursed his whiskey, barely tasting it as he observed the saloon. The gilt-framed mirrors behind the bar were clouded with age, the velvet curtains faded from sun and smoke. But it was the women who caught his attention specifically, the reluctance behind their smiles, the wariness in their movements. He'd seen enough of the world to recognize captivity when he saw it. The singer particularly drew his eye. Despite her gaudy dress and painted face, there was a dignity about her, a spark that hadn't been fully extinguished. When she finished her song, the crowd roared its approval, but Wyatt noticed how she flinched when Dobbs grabbed her arm to pull her off the stage. After 2 more days of watching, Wyatt had seen enough. He'd come to Maple Creek looking for an investment opportunity, and the Snake Eye Saloon was exactly what he sought, but not for the reasons others might assume. On the 3rd morning, he entered the town's only bank and withdrew a substantial sum from his account. By afternoon, he was sitting across from Franklin Dobbs in the saloon's back office. $3,000, Wyatt said, placing a stack of bills on the scarred wooden desk. For the saloon, the building, and everything in it, Dobbs laughed, his belly jiggling beneath his stained vest. "Son, you're either drunk or simple. This establishment brings in nearly that much every month." $2,000 for the property, Wyatt continued calmly, and $1,000 for the staff. He forced himself to use Dobbs' terminology, though it sickened him. Dobbs' piggy eyes narrowed. The girls, they're the most valuable part of this place. Each one's under contract to me for their debts. The redhead alone owes me over 500. I'm sure their debts have been paid many times over, Wyatt replied, keeping his voice even despite the anger building inside him. 3,000, cash, today, or I take my money to the saloon in Silverdale that I hear is looking for a buyer. The mention of competition made Dobbs pause. Rumors had been circulating about a new railroad line that would bypass Maple Creek entirely, potentially leaving the town and his business to wither. And here was this stranger, offering real money right now. Let me see that cash again, Dobbs said, leaning forward. Wyatt opened the satchel wider, revealing the stacks of bills. Consider it a fair price for a man looking to retire. From what I hear, Mexico is nice this time of year. The suggestion wasn't lost on Dobbs, who had outstanding warrants in 2 counties. A fresh start, far from the reach of the law, held its appeal. 5,000, Dobbs countered. 3,500, Wyatt replied. Final offer. After another hour of haggling, they settled on $4,000. By sundown, the deed was signed, witnessed by the town's lawyer, and Franklin Dobbs was last seen boarding the evening stage, his pockets heavy with cash and his conscience unburdened by the lives he was leaving behind. Word spread quickly through the small community. By the time Belinda arrived for her evening shift, confusion reigned among the saloon girls. Is it true? She asked Mabel, who was frantically packing her few belongings. Dobbs sold the place, lock, stock, and barrel, Mabel confirmed, her voice trembling, including us. We've got a new owner now, and Lord knows what he'll expect. Belinda sank onto her small bed, the iron frame creaking beneath her weight. Who is he? That quiet fella who's been watching us all week, said Sarah, the youngest of the girls at just 18. Her blonde curls bounced as she shook her head in disbelief. The one with the silver spurs. Ruby heard he paid extra for each of us. A knock at the door to their shared quarters made all 5 women freeze. After a moment, it opened to reveal the man himself, hat in hand. Ladies, Wyatt said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. I'd like a word with all of you, if you don't mind. In the main room, please. They followed him downstairs, exchanging nervous glances. The saloon was eerily quiet without the usual evening crowd. Wyatt stood behind the bar, looking uncomfortable despite being the new owner. My name is Wyatt Vallens, he began. As you've heard, I've purchased this establishment from Mr. Dobbs. And us with it, muttered Ruby, a voluptuous woman in her late 20s with fiery red hair and a tongue to match. Wyatt nodded. That's what I want to discuss. Dobbs claimed you were all indebted to him, forced to work off what you owe. Is that true? The women looked at each other, unsure how to respond to such a direct question from their new owner. Finally, Belinda spoke. He brought most of us here with promises of respectable work. By the time we realized what kind of work he meant, he'd already charged us for transport, housing, clothing. The debts just grew no matter how much we earned. Wyatt's jaw tightened, confirming what he'd suspected. Well, I bought those debts along with this place, and I'm telling you now, they're forgiven. As of this moment, you owe nothing to anyone. A stunned silence fell over the room. What's the catch? Ruby demanded, voicing what they all were thinking. No catch, Wyatt replied. You're free women. You can leave tonight if you wish, with my blessing and whatever belongs to you. Leave and go where? Asked Grace, a quiet brunette who'd rarely spoken in Wyatt's presence. Do what? We have no money, no references. It was a valid point. In 1876 America, options for women alone were limited, especially women with their background. That brings me to my second announcement, Wyatt continued. I'm keeping the saloon open, but changing how it operates. From now on, it's a legitimate business, drinks, food, and clean entertainment only. If you choose to stay and work here, you'll receive fair wages, proper quarters, and be treated with respect. The women exchanged skeptical glances. Why would you do this? Belinda asked, studying his face for any sign of deception. Wyatt met her gaze steadily. Because no person should own another. I've seen enough of that in my lifetime. There was something in his expression, a shadow of old pain that made Belinda believe him. She'd become adept at reading men's intentions, a necessary skill in her position, and what she saw in Wyatt Vallens was sincerity. "So we can stay and work as—" "What, barmaids?" Mabel asked. "Barmaids, servers, entertainers, if you sing or play an instrument," Wyatt confirmed. "The choice is yours. Stay, go, or stay until you've saved enough to move on. I'll even help those who want to relocate elsewhere, and we won't have to." Sarah trailed off, unable to finish her sentence. "No," Wyatt said firmly, "that part of the business is over. Anyone who expects otherwise will be shown the door permanently." For the first time in years, Belinda felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Freedom. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was standing before them, offering a choice they'd been denied for so long. "I'll stay," she said, breaking the silence. "At least until I figure out what comes next." One by one, the others agreed. None had immediate plans or destinations, and the promise of honest work was too valuable to dismiss. "Good," Wyatt nodded. "We'll open tomorrow as usual, but with new rules. For tonight, rest. You've earned it." As he turned to leave, Belinda called after him, "Mr. Vallens, thank you." He paused, looking back with a slight smile that transformed his weathered face. "No need for thanks, Miss Laine," she supplied. "Belinda Laine." "Miss Laine," he repeated, tipping his hat before departing. That night, for the first time since arriving in Maple Creek, Belinda slept without fear. The transformation of the Snake Eye Saloon began immediately. Wyatt closed the establishment for 3 days to make changes, paying the women their first wages in advance so they wouldn't worry about the lost time. The private rooms upstairs were converted into proper accommodations for those who wished to live on the premises, with actual locks on the doors, keys held only by the occupants. Wyatt himself took a small room behind the office, working from dawn until well past midnight to ready the place for reopening. He hired 2 burly brothers from the livery stable to act as security, with explicit instructions to ensure both customers and employees behaved respectfully. On the 4th day, the newly christened Silver Spur Saloon opened its doors. The name wasn't Wyatt's first choice, but Belinda had suggested it, pointing to his distinctive spurs as inspiration, and he found he couldn't refuse her. The townspeople were curious about the changes, and the saloon was packed by noon. Some men were disappointed to learn about the new policies, but most adapted quickly to the improved atmosphere. The food now prepared by Grace, who revealed a talent for cooking, drew praise, and Belinda's singing attracted a different sort of customer altogether. As the weeks passed, an unexpected pattern emerged. Wyatt found himself lingering whenever Belinda performed, captivated by her clear voice and the genuine smile that now graced her features when she sang. For her part, Belinda discovered that the new owner was more than just their benefactor. He was a man of principle, with a dry wit that emerged once his initial reserve faded. One evening in late autumn, after the last customer had departed, Belinda found Wyatt alone at the bar, reviewing the day's accounts. "We did well today," she remarked, sliding onto a stool opposite him. Wyatt nodded, closing the ledger. "Better than expected. At this rate, the place will turn a profit by spring." "Is that why you bought it? For profit?" He considered her question, taking his time as he always did before speaking. "Partly," he admitted. "A man needs to make a living. But mainly, I wanted something of my own after years of working other people's land, driving other people's cattle. And freeing Dobbs' captives was just a fortunate side effect." There was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "I saw what he was doing the moment I walked in," Wyatt said quietly. "It wasn't right. I had the means to change it, so I did." Belinda studied him in the dim lamplight, noting the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, which was happening more frequently these days. "You never talk about your past," she observed. "Where you came from, what you did before buying this place." A shadow crossed his face. Not much worth telling, but Belinda had grown bolder in her newfound freedom. "I disagree. I think there's a great deal worth knowing about you, Mr. Vallens." He looked up, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. Wyatt, he corrected softly. If we're going to be friends, you should call me Wyatt. Are we friends? Something flickered in his gray eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or hope. I'd like to think so. Belinda smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire in the hearth. Then you should call me Belinda, not Miss Laine. Belinda, he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. It suits you? They talked late into the night, sharing small pieces of themselves. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher who died of influenza, leaving her to make her own way at 18. How a seemingly kind man had offered her work in Colorado, only to deliver her to Dobbs upon arrival. In turn, Wyatt spoke briefly of fighting for the Union in the war, of the horrors he'd seen that left him with nightmares even a decade later. Of cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, of sleeping under stars and enduring blizzards, droughts, and stampedes. Why settle here? Belinda asked as the clock struck midnight. Maple Creek isn't exactly a booming metropolis, Wyatt smiled. That's precisely why I've had enough excitement for one lifetime. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere I could build something lasting. The look he gave her then made Belinda wonder if he was speaking solely about the saloon, but before she could pursue that thought, Ruby burst through the doors, her face flushed with excitement. You'll never guess what just rolled into town, she exclaimed. A photography studio on wheels. They've set up by the Mercantile and are taking portraits for just 50 cents. Photography was still a novelty in small western towns, and Ruby's enthusiasm was contagious. Soon, all 5 women were planning a visit to the traveling studio the next day. We should have a group portrait, Mabel suggested, to remember this time now that things are changing. You should join us, Wyatt, Belinda said impulsively. You're part of this new beginning, too. He looked surprised at the invitation but nodded. I'd be honored. The following afternoon, they closed the saloon for 2 hours, another unheard-of occurrence under Dobbs' reign, and made their way to the portable studio. The photographer, a dapper man with an elaborate camera on a tripod, arranged them carefully. The 5 women seated or standing in elegant poses, with Wyatt standing slightly apart, as befitted the proprietor. Just before the exposure, Belinda reached out and took Wyatt's hand, pulling him closer to the group. You're not just our employer, she whispered. You're the reason we're free. The photograph captured a moment of genuine happiness, 6 people bound not by ownership or obligation, but by choice and growing affection. When the finished portraits were delivered a week later, Wyatt had copies made for each of them and hung the largest in a place of honor behind the bar. As winter descended on Maple Creek, bringing snow that transformed the muddy streets into pristine white pathways, life at the Silver Spur fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for cleaning and preparation, afternoons for the lunch crowd, and evenings for music and socializing. Wyatt proved to be a fair but firm owner, quick to praise good work and gentle in his corrections. He insisted on proper treatment for all who worked there, sometimes ejecting patrons who couldn't adjust to the new standards. His reputation spread, and soon the Silver Spur was known as a place where a man could enjoy good food, fine music, and honest company without the seediness often associated with frontier saloons. For Belinda, the months brought healing and rediscovery. Without the constant fear and degradation that had defined her life under Dobbs, she found herself remembering the young woman she'd been before, educated, hopeful, with dreams beyond mere survival. She began reading again, borrowing books from Wyatt's modest collection, and even started teaching Sarah, who'd never had formal schooling, to read and write. The women's appearances changed as well. Gone were the garish dresses and heavy makeup of Dobbs' era, replaced with simpler, more respectable attire. They still looked attractive, their livelihoods depended on drawing customers. After all, but the vulgar display had given way to genuine charm. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the biting cold. Wyatt surprised everyone by closing the saloon on Christmas Eve and inviting all his employees to share a special dinner in the main room, transformed for the occasion with evergreen boughs and candles. It was during this celebration that Belinda first noticed the way Sarah looked at Tom, one of the security brothers. The youngest of the former saloon girls had blossomed under their new circumstances, her natural sweetness no longer overshadowed by fear. Tom, a quiet man of 25, returned her glances with shy smiles. "Young love," Mabel murmured, following Belinda's gaze. "It's good to see it happening naturally, not forced or bought." Belinda nodded, watching as Sarah laughed at something Tom said. "Do you think she'll leave us soon?" "For marriage, wouldn't that be wonderful?" Mabel replied. "A real future, a family of her own. It's more than any of us dared hope for a few months ago." The thought was both happy and unsettling. Belinda was genuinely pleased for Sarah, but the prospect of their little group beginning to disperse brought an unexpected pang of loss. They'd formed a kind of family, these 5 women who'd endured so much together. "You're looking pensive," Wyatt's voice came from behind her, and Belinda turned to find him offering a cup of hot cider. "Just thinking about changes," she said, accepting the drink gratefully. "Good ones, mostly." He followed her earlier gaze to Sarah and Tom. "Ah. Young hearts finding each other. It seems our little family might start branching out soon." Wyatt considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Families grow and change. It doesn't mean they stop being families." Something in his tone made Belinda look up at him sharply. His gray eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there when he first arrived in Maple Creek, and it wasn't just the reflection of the Christmas candles. "Dance with me?" he asked suddenly, as Ruby began playing a gentle tune on the piano. Belinda hesitated only briefly before setting down her cider. "I'd like that." His hand was warm and calloused as it closed around hers, his other arm settling respectfully at her waist as they began to move to the music. Belinda had danced with countless men over the years, but never like this, never with this curious mixture of nervousness and comfort, of excitement and peace. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly as they turned. "For what? For saving us, for giving us back our lives." Wyatt shook his head slightly. "You don't owe me thanks for doing what any decent man should have done." "But that's just it," Belinda insisted. "Most men wouldn't have. Most would have continued what Dobbs started or worse." He fell silent for a moment, their steps slowing. "I've seen what happens when people are treated as property," he finally said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "During the war and after, I swore I'd never be part of such a thing, never profit from another's bondage." Belinda felt a lump form in her throat at the conviction in his words. "You're a good man, Wyatt Vallens." His eyes met hers, searching. "I try to be," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until Ruby struck a wrong chord and broke into laughter, shattering the spell. Wyatt stepped back, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "Thank you for the dance, Belinda." She nodded, suddenly aware of how rapidly her heart was beating. "Thank you for Christmas, for all of this." As she turned away to join the others, Belinda realized something had shifted between them, something significant, though neither had put it into words. The new year arrived with a blizzard that kept most of Maple Creek indoors for 3 days. The Silver Spur remained open, becoming a haven for those caught in town and a gathering place for locals brave enough to venture through the snow. Wyatt set up cots in the back room for stranded travelers, charging only a nominal fee for the shelter. By February, when the worst of winter began to loosen its grip, news arrived that changed the course of their small community. The railroad would indeed be coming to Maple Creek, with construction to begin in the spring. The announcement transformed the sleepy town overnight, with property values soaring and new businesses making plans to open. "This could be very good for us," Wyatt remarked as he and Belinda watched surveyors marking the proposed route from the saloon's front window. "More customers, more opportunities." Belinda nodded, but her expression was troubled. "And more men like Dobbs looking to exploit anyone vulnerable." Wyatt glanced at her, understanding her concern. "We won't let that happen, not here, not again." His use of "we" wasn't lost on Belinda. Over the past months, she'd taken on more responsibility at the Silver Spur, helping with the accounts and making decisions about operations. Their partnership had evolved naturally, built on mutual respect and a shared vision for what the establishment could be. "We should expand," she said suddenly. "Add more tables, perhaps a separate dining area for families. With the railroad coming, there will be women and children traveling through who might appreciate a respectable place to eat." Wyatt smiled, impressed by her foresight. "That's an excellent idea. The empty shop next door is for sale. We could connect the buildings." Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of a stranger, a well-dressed man, who introduced himself as Edwin Caldwell, representative of the Western hotel chain. "Mr. Vallens," he said after ordering a whiskey, "I'll come straight to the point. My company is interested in establishing a presence in Maple Creek before the railroad arrives, and your location is ideal. We're prepared to make a generous offer for this property." Wyatt's expression remained neutral. "I'm not looking to sell, Mr. Caldwell." "You haven't heard my offer," Caldwell persisted, naming a sum that made even Belinda's eyes widen. It was several times what Wyatt had paid only months earlier. "The Silver Spur isn't for sale at any price," Wyatt replied firmly, "but thank you for your interest." After Caldwell departed, promising to return when Wyatt had thought it over, Belinda turned to him in amazement. "That was enough money to buy a ranch 10 times the size of this place," she said. "Why didn't you consider it?" Wyatt met her gaze steadily. "Because some things aren't about money. This place, what we've built here, it matters. These people matter." He paused before adding softly, "You matter." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Belinda felt her cheeks warm, not from embarrassment, but from a rush of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge fully until now. "Wyatt," she began, but was interrupted by the arrival of the afternoon mail delivery. Among the letters was one addressed to Sarah, who had recently begun corresponding with her family back east after years of silence. The young woman's cry of delight drew everyone's attention. "My sister's coming to visit," she announced, her face radiant. "She's arriving on next month's stage." The news was celebrated by all, but it created a practical problem. Where would Sarah's sister stay? The rooms above the saloon, while much improved, were hardly suitable for a respectable young woman from Boston. "She can have my room," Sarah insisted. "I'll share with one of the others," but Wyatt had a different solution. "The expansion we were discussing, we should start it now, add proper guest rooms. Not just for Sarah's sister, but as part of our new business model." Within days, construction began on connecting the Silver Spur to the vacant building next door. Wyatt hired local carpenters and put Belinda in charge of designing the new guest quarters, recognizing her eye for creating comfortable, welcoming spaces. As they worked side by side, planning and overseeing the expansion, the bond between them deepened. Their conversations expanded beyond the business to more personal hopes and dreams. Wyatt spoke of someday having land outside town, not a large ranch but enough for a garden and perhaps a few horses. Belinda shared her desire to perhaps start a small school, recognizing that Maple Creek would need education for the children of families drawn by the railroad. Sarah's sister, Elizabeth, arrived in late March, bringing with her the refinement and manners of Eastern society. To everyone's relief, she showed no dismay at her sister's circumstances, embracing both Sarah and her new friends with genuine warmth. At 22, she was only slightly older than Sarah, but possessed a confidence and education that immediately impressed Wyatt. "Miss Elizabeth," he said after dinner on her third evening in town, "I understand you were a teacher in Boston." Elizabeth nodded, her blonde curls so like Sarah's bouncing with the movement. "For 3 years, yes, I taught at a girls' academy." Wyatt glanced at Belinda, who immediately understood his thinking. "Have you considered staying in Maple Creek?" she asked. "With the railroad coming, there will be families settling here who will want education for their children." Elizabeth looked surprised. "I hadn't thought beyond visiting Sarah, to be honest, but a new school in a growing town, it does have a certain appeal." Over the following weeks, what had begun as a casual suggestion took shape into a real plan. The town council, eager to attract permanent residents rather than just passing trade, offered land for a schoolhouse. Elizabeth, with Wyatt and Belinda's encouragement, drafted proposals and began gathering support from local families. As spring bloomed across the valley, bringing wildflowers and new growth, other changes came to their small group. Ruby announced her engagement to a cattle buyer who'd been courting her since January, and Mabel decided to use her savings to open a dressmaking shop, having discovered a talent for fashion during their transformation of the saloon. "Everyone's moving forward," Belinda remarked to Wyatt one evening as they sat on the newly built porch of the Silver Spur, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. "Finding their paths." Wyatt nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "That was always the point, wasn't it? For each of you to have the freedom to choose your own way." "And what about you?" she asked softly. "Is this what you envisioned when you bought the Snake Eye Saloon?" He turned to look at her then, his expression open and unguarded in a way she'd rarely seen. "Some of it. The business, the respect we've earned in the community, yes, but other things." He paused, seemed to gather his thoughts. "Other things I never dared hope for." The way he looked at her made his meaning clear, though he didn't elaborate. Belinda felt her heart quicken, a now familiar response to his presence that had grown stronger with each passing month. "Wyatt," she began, gathering her courage. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a rider coming fast down the main street. They both stood as the horse and its rider skidded to a halt before the saloon. "Fire!" the man shouted. "The lumber mill's ablaze, and it's spreading to the nearby buildings." Wyatt was moving before the rider finished speaking, calling for the men inside to follow. Belinda rushed to organize buckets and blankets, knowing from past experience that every hand would be needed to fight a fire before it consumed the largely wooden town. For hours, they battled the flames alongside the rest of Maple Creek's residents. The mill was lost, but they managed to save most of the surrounding structures. By dawn, exhaustion had set in, with soot-covered men and women slumping wherever they could find a place to rest. Belinda was helping distribute coffee and bandages when she realized she hadn't seen Wyatt in some time. Anxiety gripped her as she searched through the crowd, only to have it confirmed by Tom's grave face when she questioned him. "He went back in for old man Jenkins," Tom explained, his voice hoarse from smoke. "The roof collapsed just after he got Jenkins out. Doc's with him now at his office." Belinda ran through the streets, heedless of her disheveled appearance or the stares of those she passed. When she reached the doctor's small house, she found the waiting room already occupied by several others, including Sarah and Elizabeth. "How is he?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Doctor?" Wilson emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. "Burns on his arms and a nasty gash on his head, but he'll live. He's asking for you, Miss Laine." Relief made her knees weak as she followed the doctor to where Wyatt lay on an examination table, his arms bandaged and a bloodied cloth pressed to his forehead. "You foolish, brave man," she whispered, taking his hand carefully between both of hers. Despite his injuries, he managed a weak smile. "Had to make sure everyone was safe. At the risk of your own life." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "Seemed important at the time," he murmured, then winced as the doctor began cleaning the wound on his head. "He needs rest," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "The burns aren't too severe, but that head injury needs watching. Someone should stay with him for the next day or so." "I will," Belinda said immediately in a tone that brooked no argument. They moved Wyatt to his room behind the saloon office, where Belinda maintained a constant vigil. The first night was the worst, with Wyatt drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out in his fever as if still trapped in the burning building or perhaps reliving older traumas from the war. Belinda bathed his forehead with cool water, spoke soothingly when nightmares gripped him, and prayed as she had not prayed in years. By morning, his fever had broken, and he slept peacefully at last. She must have dozed off herself, for she woke to find him watching her, his gray eyes clear and alert. "You stayed," he said softly. Belinda straightened in her chair, smoothing her rumpled dress. "Of course I stayed. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," he admitted, attempting to sit up and grimacing at the pain in his bandaged arms. But alive, thanks to you. Thanks to Dr. Wilson, she corrected, helping him adjust his position against the pillows. I just kept you company. Wyatt shook his head slightly, then stopped when the movement clearly caused him discomfort. You did more than that, I remember, your voice guiding me back when I was lost in the dark. The simple statement touched her deeply. Well, she said, trying to lighten the mood, someone had to make sure you didn't undo all your good work by dying heroically. His laugh turned into a cough, and she quickly offered him water. Belinda, he said after drinking, his tone serious once more. When I was in that burning building, thinking I might not make it out, there was only one regret in my mind. She held her breath, waiting. That I never told you how I feel about you, he continued, holding her gaze. That I never said what's been in my heart these past months. The world seemed to narrow to just this room, this moment. And what is that? She asked, barely above a whisper. That I love you, he said simply. That you've become the center of my world, and whatever future I hope for includes you in it. Joy surged through Belinda, so intense it was almost painful. I love you too, she replied, the words falling from her lips as naturally as breathing. I think I have for longer than I was willing to admit, even to myself. Wyatt reached for her hand, wincing slightly at the movement but not withdrawing. I know your past makes you cautious, and God knows you have every right to be. I don't expect, she silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips gently to his, a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words of her trust and love. When she pulled back, his expression was one of wonder and happiness that mirrored her own feelings. Well, he said, a smile spreading across his face, that settles that. Wyatt's recovery was slow but steady. During his convalescence, Belinda took charge of the Silver Spur, proving herself more than capable of managing the thriving business. The expansion was completed under her supervision, with the new dining area and guest rooms opening just as the first railroad workers began arriving in town. By early summer, when Wyatt was finally back on his feet, their relationship was common knowledge in Maple Creek. Far from causing scandal, the town largely approved of the match, seeing in it a redemption story that reflected well on their growing community. On a perfect July evening, with the mountains silhouetted against a copper sky, Wyatt took Belinda riding to a spot overlooking the valley. There, beneath an old oak tree, he knelt despite his still healing injuries and asked her to be his wife. I can't promise wealth or an easy life, he said, holding out a simple ring with a small sapphire that matched her eyes. But I can promise to love you, respect you, and stand beside you through whatever comes our way. Tears of happiness spilled down Belinda's cheeks as she accepted both the ring and the promise it represented. That's all I could ever want, she told him, her voice thick with emotion. A true partnership built on love and respect. Their wedding took place in September, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Sarah served as maid of honor, with Elizabeth, Ruby, Mabel, and Grace completing the bridal party, the 5 women who had once been bound by circumstance, now united by choice and affection. The Silver Spur closed for the day another first, and its main room was transformed for the reception. Flowers adorned every table, and a feast prepared by Grace and her new assistant cook received universal praise. When Wyatt rose to offer a toast, his voice carried throughout the room, strong and clear. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. And to the remarkable woman who has agreed to share mine. Belinda, you are the bravest, kindest soul I've ever known, and I count myself the luckiest man alive to call you my wife. The cheers that followed seemed to lift the very roof, and Belinda felt surrounded by more love and goodwill than she had ever thought possible during her darkest days. As the celebration continued around them, Wyatt led her to a quiet corner. I have something for you, he said, producing a document from his pocket. A wedding gift. Belinda unfolded the paper to find a deed not to the saloon as she might have expected, but to a small property at the edge of town with a cozy house set among cottonwood trees. Our home, Wyatt explained. Separate from the business, a place that's just ours. I bought it last month and have been having it fixed up in secret. Overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness, Belinda could only embrace him, the deed clutched tightly in her hand. It represented everything she'd been denied for so long: privacy, security, a place of her own. That night, they slipped away from the festivities to visit their new home for the first time. In the silver light of a full moon, Wyatt carried her across the threshold, his strong arms supporting her as if she were made of delicate crystal. The house was simple but beautiful, with polished wooden floors, large windows that would catch the morning sun, and a stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Someone Sarah and Elizabeth, Belinda suspected, had filled vases with wildflowers and lit candles to welcome them. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning slowly to take in every detail. "Absolutely perfect." Wyatt watched her with undisguised adoration. "It's just the beginning," he promised, "the beginning of a life we'll build together." Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, Belinda lay in her husband's arms, marveling at how far she had come from that frightened young woman watching through a grimy saloon window. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe fully in the future they were creating, one built on mutual love, respect, and freedom. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt murmured, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. She smiled, tilting her face up to his. "That some dreams do come true, even when you've stopped believing in them." His answering kiss held all the promise of tomorrow, and Belinda Valens surrendered to it completely, her heart finally, truly free. The years that followed brought changes both to Maple Creek and to the Valens family. The railroad's arrival transformed the once sleepy town into a bustling community, with new businesses opening monthly and families settling in the expanding neighborhoods. Elizabeth's school flourished, eventually moving from its modest single-room building to a proper schoolhouse with multiple classrooms and 3 teachers. Sarah, after marrying Tom in a winter ceremony that rivaled Wyatt and Belinda's in joyfulness, joined her sister in teaching, having discovered a gift for working with the youngest children. The Silver Spur grew into one of the territory's most respected establishments, known for its excellent food, clean rooms, and the fair treatment of all who worked there. Wyatt and Belinda continued to run it together, their complementary strengths creating a partnership that was admired throughout the region. In the spring of 1878, their first child was born, a son they named James, after Wyatt's father. Belinda discovered that motherhood suited her perfectly, and the sight of Wyatt cradling their infant son with such tender care only deepened her love for him. They expanded their home as their family grew, adding rooms for the 2 daughters who followed, Catherine in 1880 and Margaret in 1882. The house became a center of community life, with Sunday dinners that regularly included their extended family of friends. Ruby's marriage to the cattle buyer took her to Denver, but she returned often, bringing gifts and stories of city life. Mabel's dressmaking business thrived, eventually expanding to include a millinery section run by Grace, who had discovered a talent for creating fashionable hats. As for Franklin Dobbs, rumors occasionally reached them of his activities in Mexico, none of them savory, but he never returned to Colorado, a fact for which they were all grateful. On the 10th anniversary of Wyatt's purchase of the Snake Eye Saloon, they held a special celebration at the Silver Spur. The original photograph taken all those years ago was displayed prominently, a reminder of how far they had come. "Do you ever regret it?" Belinda asked Wyatt as they stood arm in arm, watching their children play with Sarah and Tom's young son. "Buying the saloon, taking on all of us and our problems." Wyatt looked down at her, the love in his eyes undimmed by the passing years. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Best investment I ever made," she laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Even with all the challenges, the fire, the expansion, dealing with difficult customers, especially with all that," he said seriously, "because it brought me you, our children, this life we've built." "What's any of that compared to such treasures?" Belinda felt the familiar warmth that his words always kindled in her heart. At 33, she had experienced both the darkest and brightest aspects of life, and she understood now that one made the other all the more precious. Do you remember what you said to us that first night? She asked. When you told us we were free, Wyatt nodded, that no person should own another. You gave us more than freedom, Belinda said softly. You gave us dignity, respect, the chance to become who we were meant to be. He kissed her gently. You did that yourselves once the obstacles were removed. I just opened the door. As twilight descended over Maple Creek, casting long shadows across the land that had become their home, Belinda reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From captivity to freedom, from isolation to community, from despair to hope, it was a path she could never have imagined when she watched that blood-red sunset so long ago. Yet here they stood, surrounded by the family they had created and the friends who had become family. The Silver Spur continued to thrive, a testament to what could be built when people were valued for their humanity rather than exploited for profit. Their children were growing strong and kind, aware of their parents' history, but not defined by it. In the soft glow of lanterns being lit against the gathering darkness, Wyatt took her hand, his touch as reassuring and beloved as it had been from the first time they danced together. What shall we do with the next 10 years? He asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she adored. Belinda smiled, squeezing his hand. Live them, she replied simply. Love them, make them count, just as we've done with these. And as their youngest daughter ran to them, arms outstretched for an embrace that enfolded all three in its warmth, Belinda knew with absolute certainty that they would do exactly that, continue building their life together, day by day, with the same courage, compassion, and love that had transformed not only their own stories, but the story of an entire community. In the Silver Spur, the portrait still hung behind the bar, a reminder of beginnings, of courage, and of the enduring power of treating each person with the dignity they deserved. And in the hearts of all who had been part of that journey, the knowledge lived on that freedom, once truly tasted, was a legacy worth preserving for generations to come.